Hi, welcome to The Real Deal, What Matters. I'm Mark Steele and I'm here with Patrick Henry, the CEO of QuestFusion, and today's topic is growing a successful business in the ever-changing pay TV market. Those of you that are in the pay TV industry probably recognize Patrick as the CEO of Entropic, a very successful, innovative company that created two standards and then built successful products around those, which is a great formula to use. Those two standards were MoCA, which really permitted the high-speed media transfer between rooms. That led to the multi-room DVR that's widely deployed today. And then the other was the DBS channel stacking switch, which significantly lowered the cost of installation for satellite in the home. So Patrick was CEO during the time took the company before products, before revenue, all the way to a successful IPO on the NASDAQ. That's a pretty good accomplishment. And as a result, he's got a lot of experience that he's going to share with you today. Here's the format. I'm going to ask some questions just to get us rolling. That will spur you to think of some questions. I want you to write them down. And then I'm going to take questions from the audience. And you can actually type them in, and I think they'll be queued up for us. So make sure you're putting your questions in while you're thinking about it during our discussion, then we'll get to you. And then stick around to the end, because at the end Patrick has a good offer for all of you, a free offer for something that might be of value to you. So Patrick, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate you being here.
No problem. So you've had some success at Entropic as a startup. That's hard to do in this industry. And here's the question: did you take all the opportunities? Or are there any left for our listeners?
You know, I think that first I want to thank Mark for being here with me. He's a real product expert, partnership expert in the technology industry. He's worked for companies like Motorola and Qualcomm and Gateway. And I've gotten to know Mark pretty well over the last couple of years, so really grateful that he was able to do this with us.
Happy to do it.
Getting back kind of the question, I think that there are still tons of opportunities in pay TV. And it really gets down to, you know, can you come up with ideas that deliver real value to the customer across the food chain? And this really means not only the pay TV operator, but the OEM and the end consumer. All of those are critical constituencies when you're trying to develop a product and get it deployed within the pay TV industry. You need to solve a critical problem, and you need to have an understanding of the process of taking a company from initial concept through the supply chain and also through the sales cycle of the pay TV industry, which is a pretty long sales cycle. I think as I've done QuestFusion, that's my consulting company over the last year, I've met with dozens of startups with some without great ideas, some with fantastic ideas. Some of the ideas may not be appropriate for the pay TV industry, but others certainly have applications within pay TV. I think the challenge is, even with those companies, they don't have a good understanding of what it takes to actually navigate through, and get business in pay TV.
Yeah, I agree. The sales cycle is really complicated. So why don't we talk about what are the challenges you see in the sales cycle, other than the length, which everybody knows is long?
Yeah, I mean the pay TV industry is, in order to penetrate it, it's a complex multi-year process, and it's far from linear. I think that you also have to be aware of the landing zones you're trying to hit. So as an example, and as a semiconductor chip company like Entropic, getting MoCA deployed required us initially to demonstrate proof of concept at a laboratory level, then at a small deployment level. We had to do field trials on our own to prove out the technology, and then work with some of the key ecosystem partners, the OEMs, that eventually also became investors in Entropic, as did some of the PayTV operators, to really work closely with them in a collaborative way. One of the biggest ways we did that was establishing an industry alliance called MoCA, where we took our technology and agreed to make that an industry standard in order to get widespread traction for the product.
That's really smart. Yeah, so getting traction is important, and you mentioned field trials. They're a critical milestone, but they're not the end goal. So many technology companies I run into, they think they get a field trial, they're done. They're not done.
No, it's really the beginning.
Yeah, and there's lots of hurdles that you have to go to, and strategic partnerships are near and dear to my heart. It's what I really focus on right now. And I gotta believe that strategic partnerships like the alliance that you set up. Can you talk about strategic alliances and really what are the role that they play in the PayTV ecosystem?
Well, strategic partners are critical in PayTV because it's a industry that's been around a long time, and as a new player or a new entrant to the market, there's a high degree of skepticism around anybody coming in that they don't have a decades-long relationship with. So building relationships with key partners, as an example, Motorola was one of our key partners working in Entropic. They were one of the early adopters of MoCA, and we would jointly pursue business, us as the technology supplier and them as the set-top box supplier within the industry. And those were like what I would call business partnerships, working with the technology arms and the business parts of those companies. We also had strategic partnerships on the investor side. So trying to align interests between the companies that we were selling products to and the financial success on a small scale, but still there was alignment of interest as we had strategic partners come in as strategic investors. That also allowed them to have an inside seat at the board. They weren't board members, but they were board observers. So they were able to kind of get a better understanding. And through that process, you build relationships and you build trust. And that's really the key thing about these partnerships is you have somebody that's then an ally that has this decades-long relationship, and while you're building the relationship with the customer yourself.
Yeah, it's all about leverage. Strategic partnerships are all about leverage. And like you said, there you're leveraging credibility.
Yeah,
because it's hard for startups to have credibility. Now, I know you have lots of other jewels that you harvested from your successes and your trials as you went along. So what are some other lessons that you have that you want to share with us today?
Well, I think there's really four key things that come to my mind. I mean, the first thing is, as you're formulating your business idea, you need to be honest with yourself. This will save you a lot of time and grief and money because in my experience, most ideas are bad. Now you might come up with something that has, an idea that may have a little hair on it, and it actually could be a good idea if you give it a haircut.
Yeah.
So that's a matter of refining the idea and really understanding, getting back to landing zones.
Yeah.
Where what you're trying to do, what problem are you trying to solve? What key pain point is out there for the customer, and your solution can alleviate that pain. That's critical to it. How long will it take? All these things are elements of a business plan, and being realistic and practical around how long things take. How much money do you really need to raise in order to get from point A to point B and then from point B to point C? All these things are really important, and being honest with yourself, being self-critical, using friendly relationships to vet ideas before you take them to the customer. But then as you're having discussions with the customer, developing mentorship relationship, coaching relationships, and I've always found that recruiting industry experts onto your either your observatory board or your technical advisory board, your business advisory board is also very helpful, because then you've got somebody that has a lot of experience in the industry, but on kind of friendly terms with you, giving you coaching and guidance.
That's important.
I think after you've gone through that process and you really feel a high level of confidence that you have something that has value and will work, and it's a matter of convincing other people of that, you really need to be the head cheerleader and evangelist and advocate of that idea. Vetting, scrutinizing is key, but then once you kind of get over the hump, you have to be out there really being super excited about the idea. This is important for your team, this is important for your customers, because if you're not passionate and you're not excited about the idea, nobody else will be either.
Yeah.
They're always going to be a step back from where you're at in terms of the passion. So you really have to have that passion.
Yeah, the way I say it is, why would I write you a check if you're not excited about it?
Exactly.
You better show me you're excited about it every single time I see you. Right?
No doubt.
Right. So I know you've got other examples. Give me an example from Entropic where you had to really be that cheerleader. You really had to beat the drum, so to speak.
Well, in the case of MoCA, which is the thing that became the de facto industry standard for home networking of digital entertainment.
But I remember when it wasn't.
Yeah.
You had HP&A, you had HomePlug, you had a ton of stuff.
Exactly.
Everybody competing for attention.
And people were, basically laughing us out of the room.
Right.
First thing is, nobody's going to do home networking over cable.
Right.
And the second thing is there's not really a need for the technology. You know, the idea of multi-room DVR, even though we believed in it, it wasn't a wide-held industry belief that, you know, you would have a single DVR as a media server feeding video to the other devices in the house.
Right.
So, you know, finally people started to believe that multi-room DVR could become a reality, and we continue to plow away with, you know, our partners and our customers. And you know, even then it was like, why isn't going to be Wi-Fi? Why isn't it going to be HPNA? Why isn't it going to be home plug? And we stuck with our knitting, we stuck with our guns, we continued to refine the technology, we continued to take input from customers, primarily through the MoCA Alliance. And we ended up establishing a de facto industry standard, and MoCA's in, you know, tens of millions of homes today in the U.S. and many, many millions of homes outside of the U.S.
It's almost a chicken and the egg. It reminds me of when I was at Qualcomm. People said CMA violated the laws of physics. And why would you need megabit speeds over the air anyway? At the time, it was kilobit speeds. So I think it's a delicate balance. You have to have that passion and enthusiasm. On the other hand, you got to keep listening to your customers. And so this is something I kind of hear in what you're saying, which is you've got to be that passionate cheerleader, but you can't stop listening also. So tell me about your other recommendations. I know there's more.
Well, it dovetails into what you're talking about, Mark. It's really about being patient, but being persistent. It's very easy to get frustrated in any business venture. You know, we all want immediate gratification, instant gratification, and especially in pay TV, it just is not going to happen. So you have to continue to stick with things. The likelihood is you are going to get, you know, stumbling blocks along the way. If you have this idea that you're going to get, you know, a multi-million-dollar deployment with Comcast as your first customer, that's not very likely. In fact, the likelihood is about zero. So you have to start small. You have to, you know, prove your concept. You have to establish your beachhead, and you have to be prepared for the long haul. It's like going on a nature hike. You know, you need to have enough provisions. You need to have enough food, enough water, enough supplies, and this, you have to think about this as you're raising money to be able to weather the storms along the way, and that's critically important in the pay TV industry, especially. The final thing is, I think you need to hire the best and brightest people that you can find, and you know, it's like Kleiner Perkins used to say, you know, I would rather have an A team with a B idea than, you know, a B team with an A idea. Obviously you want A idea and A team, but I think if you have the right team, your ideas, even if they start, you know, with a little bit more hair on them, they come around.
Well, the good team will get the hair off.
Exactly. So, you know, hire the smartest people you can, make sure that they're at least are smarter than you are, and, you know, give them an opportunity to prove themselves. I think the other thing you got to be prepared for is once you have the right team in place, and this includes you and the rest of the team, you need to be prepared to work your collective butts off. That's just the way that startups are. And I'm all for, you know, a healthy life balance, just not for people, for my startup. So I think that, you know, you can have life balance after you've made your success, but even if you have a great idea, and you need to have the right team, and you got to be prepared to work hard.
Okay. So let me try to put that together, because what you're saying is, and this is kind of what I do when I coach startup businesses too, you got to really spend the time and do the vetting. You've got to make sure you have an idea that adds some real value to somebody. You know, preferably the consumer, but also I know I want you to talk about the value to the cable providers too. But and then you got to do the planning, like you said, have the provisions. It's going to rain, and it's going to be, the bridge is going to be out, and things are going to happen, right? Or as my friend says, then stuff happens, right? And then you got to build that great team, be the cheerleader, and execute. But those are all kind of getting things ready. How do you actually win those first customers? You get some real revenue, because you need that revenue to pay that team.
Well, I think that in my experience, you need to stay very, very focused. You need to start small, and these ideas that I hear sometimes as I'm coaching startups about kind of what I call boiling the ocean, it's a hard thing to do. You know? So you gotta, even if you have a solution that has potential widespread interest, like with MoCA, we started with a smaller beachhead, and I found that the riches are in the niches. You know, you have to establish that beachhead, build trust, demonstrate proof of concept, and work with your ecosystem partners to establish that initial traction.
Yeah, so glad you mentioned ecosystem. You know, that's really important to me. I think what I find when we talk about ecosystems, a lot of people use it as a buzzword. What I try to do in my work is lay it out on paper, deconstruct it. Most people don't do that. They just sort of talk vaguely about the ecosystem. So I think it would help our viewers today if you could just deconstruct the industry a little bit. I think that's something that would really give them a tool they could use.
Yeah, I think that what I've found, and I'm not big on academic studies, because it can sometimes be ivory tower. But I've found, I read a lot. I think there are good ideas out there. Some of the books you read, they don't really have that much value. But there are certain things like 2 books by Michael Porter I think are extremely valuable. One that talks about the value chain. You don't need to read the whole book. It's about that thick. But look at what the value chain is, and that helps do the deconstruction you're talking about. And his other book, he has industry structural analysis, where you look at the 5 forces that affect an industry structure. And that's something that I'm a big advocate of. In terms of PayTV, clearly PayTV operators are not startups. It's an established industry, a mature company, but they can be entrepreneurial and innovative. And in fact, there's been innovation in the last 10 to 15 years within the PayTV industry. And there's pockets of people inside these big companies that are very innovative. And it's a matter of identifying those people. Sometimes they're in the CTO's office, sometimes they might be in technical operations. And there's people also in the OEMs that are highly innovative. So I think as a couple examples of this, AT&T, Uverse, and Verizon Fios, those were basically PayTV startups that happened in the last 10 to 15 years. Now those are huge companies, but
they were acting like startups.
But they were acting like startups in terms of those initiatives. They were already competing with the cable MSOs in telephony and in high-speed broadband, but they didn't have the highest revenue per subscriber service. So they had, talked about buying satellite companies and such, and now AT&T has bought DirecTV. But they exhibited, a level of innovation there. And in fact, the first deployment of MoCA was in the Verizon Fios deployment. Even though some of the first customers we were talking to were EchoStar, Dish Network, and Comcast. Because you sometimes need to work with a new entrant in order to get things going.
Well, my observation from the outside was you actually were taking your own advice. You were starting with those new entrants. Really, the satellite guys were sort of on the out at the time. And you were giving them something that that their competitors didn't have, which led to, I think, didn't the satellite people have multi-room TV first, right? And then that sort of put the pressure on the other ones to innovate. So that's a point I want to get to.
But what we're starting to see now is more momentum around streaming sports services as well. There's 2 companies, New Lion, it's NEU Lion, not like New Lion Entertainment, but they have a streaming service. They recently bought a company in town, Divx, that has the encoding technology used for streaming. And Major League Baseball has a technology arm called MLBAM. They also have a streaming service. So I think we're going to see continued innovation, and a lot of these things will cross over to traditional pay TV, but it's just unlikely that the pay TV operators are going to be, the innovators. And this kind of brings up a key point. Competitive forces outside the industry and new entrants initially catalyze most of the innovation with the incumbent pay TV operators.
Yeah, isn't that funny how competition actually can spur these sometimes, and I hate to be stereotypical, but these sort of bureaucratic, big, lumbering companies. And I'm not trying to be personal. It's just when a company gets to be a certain size, that's what happens, right? And so it's really funny how real competition coming from outside the industry sometimes is like a stick in their eye, and then they have to wake up and they got to get going, or they die. Right. So now I want to ask you about something that I've personally seen happen with my kids, and it's happening now with me, which is cord cutting. So when I actually used the phrase cord cutting with my kids, they actually said, "What do you mean cut the cord?" And I said, "Blah blah blah." And I told them, well, for those of you who don't know, cord cutting is when you have pay TV or cable TV service and you quote cut the cord. You don't really cut the cord because you still have your cable modem or your Fios. You've got the internet, but then everything you're consuming media-wise is coming in over the top. And I said to my kids, blah blah blah, you're cord cutters, and they said, "Dad, we never had the cord." Interesting.
Yeah.
So they don't actually even think of themselves as pay TV or cable TV consumers. They think of themselves as high-speed internet consumers.
Yeah.
So talk about that and talk about where the growth is now going to come, given, if you think about it, that could be a death knell for the industry. So where is the growth?
Yeah, well, if you look at, the overall pay TV industry, with the incumbents, the cable MSOs, the satellite companies, and now the telcos, it's a mature industry at the top level.
Yeah.
So in fact, the only growth that's really occurred in those companies has been through mergers and acquisitions and through deployment of new services.
That's a sign of maturity.
Yeah, actual pay TV subscriptions have been on the decline in the U.S. over the last several years at a slow rate, but now you're starting to see a little bit more acceleration there because of the generational issue that you're talking about, Mark. So I think that there are opportunities for growth, and there's opportunities for growth for innovative technologies and innovative startups. But the game with the large pay TV operators is really no longer about subscriber growth. It's about halting churn. Churn is when a subscriber moves from one operator to another operator, or moves from one operator to no service at all for pay TV, and they're just using Netflix. And it's a game about share of wallet. So how much revenue am I getting per subscriber, and can I come up with innovative services that can increase the amount of dollars that I'm getting from the consumer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for pay TV. It could be for high-speed broadband. It could be for telephony. It could be for home security. A lot of different opportunities there.
Yeah, so it sounds like the people that are listening today, they really need to almost put a microscope on it and look at where is it that the operators, where are they going, because they have to survive. If they want to survive, it isn't going to be through growth. I mean, the acquisitions are pretty much done. So what you're saying is pay attention to where they're going, like the home security. Why are they going there? Well, because it uses the backbone, uses the network, and it's just an additional kind of content, additional kind of service. So to me, when I listen to you, it sounds like you've got a lot of defensive actions going on. And there's nothing wrong with playing defense. When the cable operators and the telcos play defense, that's an opportunity for our listeners to say, how can I help them play defense? Like the example where you help reduce the cost of installation. That's a defensive play. Right? Yeah. And then also, like with your home security example, that's playing offense, right? But here's the thing, and this is the one that bothers me the most, is you got these big mature companies that aren't growing, and yet it's really hard for them to innovate. And on the other hand, you've got these little tiny startups, and most of them aren't as successful as Entropic. They're kind of in that middle. They're doing something really valuable, but they can't get the attention. So here's my $10,000 question. Isn't there a way to get these guys together? Isn't there a way to match them up? Is there like forced speed dating where we can get the big guys to listen to the little guys?
Yeah,
am I crazy?
No, I think that there's definitely a bridge that you can cross there, but it gets back to, again, understanding the ecosystem. And if you look at big companies versus small companies, I mean, there's two things I like that are little stories around that. One is, in a small company, you have one person doing 5 jobs. In a big company, you have 5 people doing 1 job.
So true.
I think the other thing is, in a startup, you have very little process. You might have some amount of process, but an engineer is going to be saying, why do I need to document this? I'm documenting it for myself. So just throw the documentation over their shoulder. Whereas big companies get such large bureaucratic processes because they're designed to make sure some bonehead doesn't make a decision that tanks the company.
Right.
So
it's protected.
It's protected. It's defensive. So it's one of those things where that's part of the ecosystem, part of dealing with mature companies. They do want to innovate. They have a desire to innovate, but it's very difficult for them. One of the processes that exists there is this kind of push-pull relationship between the technology arm, the CTO's office of a PayTV operator, and then the finance and operations portions of those organizations that basically want to run them like a bank. This is all about cash flow, and it's about maximizing cash flow, which means I don't spend much money on R&D, I don't spend much money on CapEx, and at the end of the day, you have to do both. In order to survive, you have to both eat and breathe. If you stop either one of them, it's not going to work, and that's a delicate balance you have to navigate through.
So now here's another thing we touched on a few minutes ago, but this is a really key point that I think it would really help our listeners. It's all about value. When you have a startup, you got to figure out, and you mentioned it, you have to really think deeply and get a lot of vetting about, is there value here? But here's the key, especially for a telco, any kind of telco, you're providing value. You have to provide something that is ultimately a value to the consumer. Otherwise, money doesn't flow upstream. But I would say there's probably more opportunities that provide value internally to the telco, to the PayTV operator. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a challenge that a lot of startups have, a lot of entrepreneurs have, is they think, okay, I've got this awesome solution that's going to appeal to the consumer, and they might actually be right, this is something the consumer would really like. Yeah. But it's extremely difficult to reach the consumer.
Because you can't get to them.
Without a channel.
They're not your customer.
Exactly.
They're somebody else's customer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to find ways where you identify key pain points for the PayTV operators and other people in the food chain, and that also appeal to the consumer. If you're able to do that, then you have a chance. Yeah. It's no guarantee, but and I think the big ones in the PayTV industry is, how can I lower their cost of delivering service? How can I increase their revenue per subscriber? How can I help them grow market share? Maybe not overall market share in PayTV service, but in other areas. How can I increase average revenue per subscriber? All of those things are critical. And then you have to understand the language that they speak. This is something where a lot of very strong technologists really struggle that are entrepreneurs, because they don't know, they may have a brilliant idea, but it gets lost in translation. So you have to be able to understand the language that the operator speaks and be able to communicate the idea in such a way that they can actually understand it.
Yeah. Now there's another piece though. If you think about Walmart, Walmart actually is just a way for other people to get their products and now services to the market.
Yes.
So aren't the operators kind of the same thing? Aren't they sort of controlling the shelf space?
Yeah, they're a channel to the consumer.
They own the consumer.
They do
control the consumer.
In a great regard, they do. Yeah. And I think that's where the biggest opportunity is. Right. There's huge value in incumbency.
Right.
You know, once you're already in the home, which the PayTV operator is, there's huge value in being there. Yeah. You have brand recognition, sometimes not always the greatest relationship or reputation with customers, but most customers, most consumers continue to use some form of PayTV service. Even if you're using Netflix, that's still a PayTV service. It's just not a traditional one.
Yeah, and you're using that high-speed internet.
You're using the high-speed broadband.
Right. So let me tie a little bow on it, and then we'll go to the next part of the questions I want to ask you. So the tying a bow around it says that sort of the epiphany is, don't be naive and think that you can get directly to the consumer. That's a multi-hundred million, if not billion-dollar game. So that means you've got to go through them, the PayTV operators, which means you have to treat them like a customer. And you have to think about their pain points. So that just kind of and use the ecosystem to get to the right people, because you can't just knock on the door, hi, I'm here. Yeah, you got to use the ecosystem and weave your way in, like you said, to the CTO's office, which is a great way to go.
You know, there is this, you know, there is a way to get directly to the consumer, and it's about the internet. Yeah. But even there, establishing brand recognition and how do you get something to go viral versus using established channels is really, really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, now, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and this is my first reminder to our audience. If you have questions, you should be typing them in, and they should be stacking up right now. So now it's crystal ball time. We can't have a conversation without having a crystal ball. So you have it with you? Okay. What are the real, where do you see the industry going forward, and what are the key trends? Because those trends are things that our audience needs to be aware of so they can take advantage of them.
Yeah, I actually don't have a crystal ball, but I do have a Ouija board.
Oh, good. That's almost as good. Almost as good.
So I think that, you know, hopefully I'm not one of those guys that just sees 2 points, draws a line between them, and sees a trend, but maybe not. And some of these things I think are going to be obvious to some of our listeners, because in the PayTV industry, it's kind of like watching a soap opera. You can miss it for a year and still be right on track after watching one episode. So first thing is there's going to be continued consolidation. But I think most of the consolidation that gets visibility is really at the operator level. And I think consolidation is only going to be limited by government regulation.
Right.
You know, the FCC,
We're getting close to that now.
the Justice Department, things like that.
Yeah.
So some of the most visible things that have recently happened is AT&T buying DirecTV,
Yeah.
Comcast buying NBC Universal,
Right.
Time Warner and Charter trying to merge up. And it's actually, although there's a lot of negative press around this is bad for the consumer, I think the dynamics actually exist where the new entrants, the Google TVs and the Apple TVs, and I think Netflix is a smaller company but still part of that new entrant ecosystem, that isn't taken into account by the Justice Department and the FCC. So there actually is a need for consolidation, and I think at the end of the day we're probably going to continue to see more. But there's not only consolidation at the operator level, which gets the most visibility, there's consolidation within the ecosystem, within the supply chain.
Right.
So if you look at historically when Scientific Atlanta was bought by Cisco and General Instruments was bought by Motorola, you've seen an acceleration in that over the last few years where Motorola Home was bought by Aris. Now Aris is working to buy Pace. We're going to see continued consolidation there. Cisco bought NDS, a major system software operator within the PayTV industry. And we're seeing it, in my former business, in the chip business, with guys like Avago now buying Broadcom. I mean, Broadcom is a very big company. Yeah. So you're not seeing just little mergers and acquisitions, like a big company buying up a little technology play here and there.
Big buying big.
You're seeing big buying big, exactly.
But that'll peter out.
I think it will, but I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to continue to be a trend. Okay. And we're also seeing it internationally as well, with the likes of Liberty Global and Liberty Media buying up international properties, News Corp buying up international properties. So I think that whenever there's a trend, there's typically an opportunity around that.
Yeah.
And what the PayTV operators are doing, because it is a more mature business, they're trying to find ways to squeeze out costs. Right. And you squeeze out costs through synergies and things like that. So things that can help streamline that process are definitely opportunities in PayTV. I think the second big thing, big trend is going to be the strictly imposed restrictions on CapEx and OpEx at the operator. I think they're going to get even more strict. I think this is going to be really tough. It's going, because revenue's not growing at an accelerated pace. Spending has to be cut or tightened or whatever. And that's going to be very limited. And frequently, in my experience with the PayTV operators, they manage this very tightly on a line-by-line basis. Yeah. So even if they're, say, under budget on infrastructure equipment, if they're at budget on set-top boxes, they're not going to move money from this bucket to this bucket to buy more set-top boxes.
Because the bankers are in control of that.
Exactly, because the finance departments
are heavily in control of the operators. Given our previous discussion about the constant need for innovation, doesn't this reminds me of Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, right? Which says that, and this is really actually almost like a case study out of that book, that says you have a big giant companies that it's hard to innovate for all those reasons he talks about. But now you're layering on top of that, this consolidation is a lot of it driven by economics. That's going to further constrain R&D. So that's going to make it almost impossible for them to do anything substantially, on their own, but they have to. So what do?
Well, the big company is because they're making room by some of the consolidation, like Comcast. Yeah. Comcast actually is innovating, and you're going to see kind of the haves and the have-nots to some extent. Yeah. I think Comcast, even as big as they are, it's tough for them to innovate in all the areas they want to, but they do spend a lot on R&D. But that is continuing to be tightened. Yeah. But the big companies want to be in control, more of the total solution, and that's an example of a Comcast. On the flip side, to your point, there is a big opportunity for suppliers to pick up innovation on an outsourced basis. Right. And this has always been the case in the industry, but I think it's going to be even more so going forward. But it's managing that balance, making sure the customer feels like they're enough in control, but at the same time, you need to control your intellectual property. You need to make sure that you don't get commoditized and marginalized in the process. And that's a delicate balance. But I do think that there's an opportunity there. That's why I strongly believe that focusing on a beachhead first, ideally with a small operator or a new entrant, is very helpful in penetrating PayTV.
Because it reduces the complexity. So
it reduces your risk, you know, of your ideas being usurped and you know, those types of things.
True. Yeah. So this is, it's, you know, for our listeners, it's really almost like a yin and a yang. You have to exploit the fact that these big operators aren't really truly innovative, but you can't put it in their face. You've got to make it available to them. You have to make it in an available way where they think it's a lower risk, lower cost way to do it. So that's really almost a tight wire act, and it's kind of scary, frankly, a little intimidating. But I think I hear well, you're an optimistic person anyway, but I hear some hope. I hear hope in there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. I mean, you know. So here's my question for those people listening. What would you really kind of net it out for them and say, if you're not working on this, you ought to be looking at working on this? What are the big opportunities?
Well, I would kind of put it a little differently about the big operators aren't innovative. I think that there's, at a corporate level, that's true because of the restrictions placed on them. There's actually extremely bright, extremely innovative, very creative, entrepreneurial people in those companies.
Yeah, go find them.
They just have restrictions on what they can do and how much they can do, which provides the opportunity for outsourced R&D and outsourced innovation. So, and I think the big thing for me that I've noticed in the industry really over the last 10 to 15 years is the internet changes everything.
Sure.
The initial catalyst for internet innovation was really around high-speed broadband.
Yep.
And the consumers will continue to have an insatiable appetite for higher speed broadband. The initial answer for quality of service is always provide more bandwidth. You know, there's other things you can do with that bandwidth, but providing more bandwidth is like one of the key things. And I think that one of the
innovations around bandwidth and quality of service and throughput and availability.
And not only downstream, which has been where most of the focus has been over the last 10 years, I think Verizon Fios with more of a focus on upstream bandwidth, especially as you get into personal content sharing and personal content creation, is going to become way, way more important. So innovation around broadband, then there's going to be, net neutrality is going to, the net neutrality laws are going to continue to cause challenges in a debate inside the operators about whether the high-speed broadband is dumb pipe or a smart pipe. The smart pipe being, I'm delivering pay TV service, I'm more of a media company, whereas if it's a dumb pipe, I'm more of a utility company. And I think it's going to, I think both are going to exist.
Okay, so now here's one that really worries me as a shareholder for some of these companies. The grenade that gets rolled in the tent called advertising, broadcast advertising. That grenade is that pin's already been pulled.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of problems to be solved there, and in this age of streaming content, there's an emerging requirement around anytime, anywhere access to that content. I want it on my tablet. I want it on my smartphone. And if the big pay TV operators don't do it, somebody else will. The second area is really, dovetails into that. It's around online media distribution, which will become more and more important. And what I mean by this is that traditional pay TV operators today have an online presence, but they're not an online company. The way that their presence acts needs to be significantly modified, and some of them are on the process of doing this. But it's extremely challenging.
To be more Google-like.
To be more Google-like, or more Apple-like, or even I think there's just emerging companies right now that are, for instance, big retailers that maybe they were historically bricks and mortar retailers that they're starting to gain a much broader online presence. And how can I shop online, and how can I easily access information? And this dovetails into what you're talking about advertising. I don't think traditional advertising is dead. It's still a multi-billion-dollar business, but I think dollars are going to continue to shift to online in an accelerated way, and I think there's going to be a big opportunity for interactive online advertising. There's a little company in town called TV Page that is heavily involved in using video to help people make purchasing decisions, and the way it's integrated within some of the big retailers' sites, it's highly creative, highly innovative, and I think this is going to be, if the traditional pay TV operators want to continue to be media companies as opposed to utilities, they've got to get stronger in terms of online presence, because a lot of the dollars that they enjoy today are going to be shifting to online.
I can, because if you go back to the ancient history, the advertising that I'm talking about being blown up by the grenade was tied to content, but that content was kind of static, programmed, scheduled. And what I hear you saying is it's still the same formula. It's just that the content is all over the place. It's fragmented. It's coming at you. It's recorded. It's on demand. It's user generated. Whatever. And there's advertising opportunities on all of those.
Well, and it gets to this point. There was a Microsoft study a few months ago that basically was about different demographics, and the attention span of a millennial is like 7 seconds now online, which is actually less than the attention span of a goldfish. So you have to be able to gain somebody's attention very quickly and capture that attention to keep them interested.
All right, now I'm almost done with my questions, audience, so get ready. So, so here's one, and this is kind of my pet peeve. I'm sick and tired of paying these big, huge bundles, and I don't watch 90% of the channels. So talk to me about a la carte video and what else is changing with video delivery.
Well, I think you've got to solve these infrastructure problems, at the edge of the network and the core of the network. But once those are done, I think you can establish pricing models for a la carte video and make things much more personalized, and I think that is going to happen. And there's innovation opportunities there. I also think personal content, like that's seen on YouTube, and many companies are starting to use Vimeo as well. So maybe it's not personal, meaning me as an individual, but people that aren't traditional production studios are producing a lot of content. And the PayTV operator should be able to find some way to help monetize that other than just being a dumb pipe.
Okay. All right, so now, there's no webinar ever done on the internet in the last 6 months that doesn't talk about the Internet of Things. So here's my question. Does the Internet of Things play in? You already mentioned home automation, so that's kind of my lead in. Is home automation just the bleeding edge of Internet of Things?
I think so. I mean, I think Internet of Things is going to be huge. I mean, it's like the next big idea, but it actually is the current idea. And a lot of the innovation opportunities, I don't believe are in the hardware. I think the hardware is going to be heavily commoditized. I also think that there's a lot of infrastructure that's already deployed that's just not connected. So it's about how do you connect these disparate networks. Not all of them are IP networks. Many of them use other forms of communication. Many of them use various different standards for the hardware. So I think the biggest opportunities are stitching together these disparate networks. The PayTV operators can clearly play a big way in that, in the consumer portion of that. There's an industrial automation portion, there's automotive, there's these other areas. But I think as far as the consumer goes, because they have this incumbency position, they have a big opportunity there. They're also going to be able to collect lots of data, and there's the challenge of turning that data into valuable information. There was a recent article I saw, some of my former buddies that work at Comcast, they collect a lot of user data that's actually more rich data than what Nielsen has, and they're now going to start trying to monetize some of that data. But I think that there's other interesting areas there as well.
Well, this is a great list. I hope this is giving all of you some good thoughts, things to think about. Maybe what you're working on fits within all this, maybe it doesn't, or maybe these just give you some new thoughts. So this is a great list of opportunity. I appreciate you sharing that with me.
You bet. I agree. I think there's really not a question in my mind about the opportunity in the PayTV industry. The real question is, can the incumbent PayTV operators be the ones that take advantage of it and some of these emerging opportunities from the web, or are they just going to be victims? And I think it's going to be a mixed bag, because I do think they have the incumbency position, and that's sometimes really understated and undervalued.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. It all comes down to deployment, and I know you have a lot of experience with that. And how do you motivate the operators to actually deploy? We're talking about, you've covered the roadmap of all these things. I know from my own experience, the operators, they should be deploying this stuff, but sometimes you just can't get them to take action. So how do you do that?
Well, it gets back to the offense versus defense thing that we talked about earlier. I think that the PayTV operators are not technology companies.
Isn't that shocking? Is that shocking?
There are pockets of innovators and technologists inside those companies. I remember a story. I was talking to one of my CTO buddies at one of the big PayTV operators, and we were talking about our schedule with a new technology that we were developing for them, and we were basically on schedule. He says, I just have to remind you that even if we hit all of our schedules and you hit all your schedules, it doesn't mean this is going to get deployed. And even if it does get deployed, it might not get deployed right away because the consumer's still sending in their check every month for their cable bill. So from an operations and CFO standpoint, they're not necessarily as motivated as all of us are to get this new innovative stuff out the door. I think with that said, you know, the operators are definitely much more motivated as, you know, the mature company, the defensive company. They're motivated more by fear than by greed.
Right.
So if they see a trend where they're going to be losing, you know, revenue per subscriber or increases of cost, you know, in deploying their service, then they're going to be more motivated. And it gets back to the thing, MSOs typically play more defense than offense in technology decisions. New entrants to the market may be the best initial sales opportunities because that's going to be the catalyst for the fear.
Sure.
It's
you're actually helping stoke the fear.
Exactly. But and not purposely, you're just trying to get your technology.
No, I'm doing it purposely. No, really. Because if they're afraid of that new entrant and you help that new entrant survive and do better, that actually stokes the fear and then it sucks it in. That's what happened most.
It happened in HD TV. It happened in DVR. It happened in multi-room DVR. You know, it's happened in pretty much every new innovation. Maybe with the possible exception of high-speed broadband and telephony, you know, but even there, they were going after new opportunities that exist. They were the new entrant in those markets versus the telcos.
I think you're right. Okay, I only have one more question. So do we have questions stacked up? Okay, so here's my last question. And then for those of you, don't get, when we finish, don't go anywhere because we had a special offer by Patrick and I don't want him to waste it. Okay, so I advise entrepreneurs all the time, and I'm usually skeptical. I'm concerned what they think is the next big idea. You know, we've talked about the next big idea. It's too late. And I see ideas all the time until I've had on my own where I think of something and then I don't do anything with it, and a month later, boom, it's too late. It's a month later, it's too late. So, if the people listening and watching, if they don't have a technology that's right in the pocket of anything we're talking about, is it too late for them? Is there anything left for them?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if there's any low-hanging fruit, you know, but there are definitely opportunities, and I put them into what solves pain points for the operator that also is attractive to the consumer. So the first one would be products that simplify integration. This is critical in a consolidating industry. Products that save CapEx, because CapEx budgets are continuing to get squeezed. This really helps in an environment where budgets are getting tightened. Product innovation on the margin, so things that don't require a forklift upgrade. You know, I'm able to provide something that has significant value that doesn't cost as much to deploy. Things that empower the consumer or empower the operator. So things that make it simpler for them to get their job done, because everyone knows, you know, you want things to be easy. And then you know, products that address an evolving opportunity where, you know, the concrete's not quite set yet. So you have something that might simplify the deployment. And always remember, you know, the internet changes everything. I think that those are the big opportunities that I see. And I wanted to really thank Mark. I've enjoyed the time that we spent together here. And we'll have to pick another topic sometime and get together again.
Yeah, great discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.